Attendance figures for the first week back at school will be released for England today, which will give the first official picture of how staff and pupils are being affected by a COVID wave that's now involved more than 100,000 new cases a day for nearly 3 weeks. Schools responding to a snapshot of the sector commissioned by the BBC have described challenges, including problems finding supply teachers to cover absence. Well, Dame Maura Regan is Chief Executive Officer of Bishop Hogarth Catholic Education Trust. It runs 30 schools in the northeast of England, and Markmoorhouse runs the Watergrove Multi-Academy Trust in Rochdale, Greater Manchester. Good morning.
Good morning.
Markmoorhouse, what's been your experience so far this term?
So far this term, we have 20% of staff absent and 5% of learners. So respect to the learners for getting in, but there is a gap there which we have to fill.
20% of your staff?
Yep, correct.
And what has that meant for how are you organising schools? That's an average, presumably, across your schools.
It is, across the 6 schools. We have to be artful and we have to be responsive in terms of putting classes together. And so we have a sports hall in one of the secondary schools, which now has been filled with desks, so it can accommodate up to 5 classes. And so we will get a subject specialist delivering the lesson, flanked by supply teachers, teaching assistants, other non-specialist teachers, and across the schools, across the whole body of staff. So that's site managers, kitchen staff, associate staff, everyone finding new ways of substituting for each other to make sure that we stay open.
Maura Regan, Dame Maura, what's the biggest problem your schools are facing?
In terms of actually the numbers of children that are absent and staff that are absent, I think we're in a slightly better place than Mark. We have a 9% average of staff being absent and about 8% of pupils being absent. I think the thing is that there are certain schools where it's in critical situations where they're having to put children more in bubbles. That's really not because of a lack of staff, but more of actually the rampantness of the virus. So it is a challenge. I mean, the most important thing, as the Secretary of State has said, is to keep schools open, and I think that's what we're doing. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, is effective supply cover, because many people can't get supply, and obviously supply agencies are at something like 50% down on those that are available.
So they might well be saying to schools, sorry, no one is available this morning or this week.
They very well will be. And as Mark says, we have to then be very inventive as to how we actually cover classes.
Yeah.
So.
And all of that is not ideal, far from ideal for learning, isn't it? I mean, Markmoorhouse, if you get a supply teacher in, the learning is not the same. They don't know what the pupils have covered.
No, absolutely. And it can be a tough wicket walking into a school as an unknown teacher, and you have to be confident and skillful and adaptive. And if you don't really get that lesson content, which you have eyes on perhaps at best an hour before the lesson, then that's a real problem for learning. So that group scenario whereby you've got a specialist teacher delivering is by far the best, but it is a problem, and we are working really hard to maintain the quality of learning for the young people in our care.
But that group scenario also means there are, I mean, how many pupils in one group? It's far from the normal ratio in a class.
No, absolutely. You'll have 100 to 120. So yeah, it'll be an increased ratio. So you do have to work the room well.
Maura Regan, is there anything else you can... I know the government, and we'll have figures actually out this on, well, they've asked for teachers to come back to work once you've retired. It's essentially all hands on deck. How is that likely to compare with the numbers and the issue as a whole?
Well, I have to say within our particular organisation, there haven't been any returning teachers. I think the difficulty is, while it might be a good idea for teachers to return, we have to look at the practicalities, because anyone that's been out of education for any length of time has to go through tests. They have to have an enhanced safeguarding check. So it's not that simple. And actually, very often the people that have retired or left teaching have done so because they no longer want to be in the classroom or through illness. And many people, again, as Mark says, it's a tough gig to actually walk back into a school, particularly where COVID is rife.
And if we did move in England down to 5-day isolation, would you welcome that, or would you be worried that there might be people coming back early and still potentially passing the virus on?
Personally, I'd welcome it because I think the most important thing is there are many staff that actually have no symptoms, many children that have no symptoms, and I think it's important to get staff back as quickly as possible. I think the most important thing we have to remember is that while it's significant for all children, it's particularly significant for those students that are actually facing exams, and many of them have had 2.5 years of disruption, and to then have a lack of quality teaching is actually a greater disruption for them.
Maura Regan and Markmoorhouse, thank you.